Hey family, it's Dr. Laura. And I was having an interesting conversation with my kids the other day about cancel culture. They were talking about some celebrity that they think should be canceled because of, I don't know, some ridiculous thing they did. But it led to an interesting topic of how sometimes folks cancel out kin. And I was reflecting on my own experience of this, of having difficult family members that I grew up with that I ended up kind of cutting off. And then how there were some really tough repercussions with that as I had my own kids and as I realized that, I really needed the support of those family members and kind of the wisdom that they had to offer. But to protect myself, I had cut them off. And so that led to some problems. It's something that I learned from, and it's something that I still see a lot of families struggle with in my practice of supporting families in their parenting journey. And so I just thought maybe it'd be good to discuss this issue of canceling kin and how that can come back to bite us. So people talk about canceling celebrities, and I'm more concerned, honestly, with the way that we sometimes cancel our own families. As Black folks, we know that it takes a village to raise a child. But one trend today is this idea of cutting off toxic family members or people that just create a certain like dysfunctional dynamic in the family, relatives that we just don't feel like being bothered with anymore, that we feel make our lives more stressful or that trigger us in a certain way. And sometimes as parents, we actually feel like we need to do this to protect our own kids from a family member that we think is a bad influence or will have some kind of negative impact on our child or our children. I know, like I mentioned, I've done that in the past, but there is a way in which being protective in that way can be a double-edged sword. The reality is that if we cut our kids off from their existing communities and family, our extended family, whether it be grandparents, aunts, uncles, whatever, they can end up feeling really isolated and disconnected from that part of the family. Sometimes we do have to set boundaries with certain relatives that just don't share our values or are toxic in a certain way. And we're trying to break generational curses, right? So we don't want them to have a certain influence that continues that into the next generation. But we also need to remember that separation and disconnection from one another is a generational curse that a lot of Black families are already struggling with. And it's, you know, dates back to slavery in the way that our families were ripped apart. And so that's actually something that we've been working to overcome. And so we don't actually want to do things that contribute to further, the further dismantling of our families. So how do we protect our children and not contribute to, just further separation and disconnection within our families? I think that we have to make a concerted effort to build and create loving and strong communities for our children. And that's especially true if we've had to cut off certain members of our family. We have to compensate for anyone that has been cut out of their lives. Of course, if we can at all avoid it, we should try not to cut off people within our own families, right? There will always be people that say things that offend us or that just live their lives in a way we cannot agree with. People will do things that bother us or piss us off or hurt us. They will do things that seem foul, right? And our temptation will be to just stop dealing with them, to not have this be an issue anymore by, just letting them go. And this is encouraged in a lot of self-help literature and pop psychology right now, to just kind of set a hard boundary and stop dealing with that person. But I would recommend that one of the best things that we can do for ourselves within our families is to actually seek training in effective communication and conflict resolution. These are some of the most important skills that we can develop both within the families we've created with our children and our partners, and also the families that we come from, be that, parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters, whatever. And as romantic partners, as husbands, wives, boyfriends, girlfriends, all of these are skills that we're going to need to know. We need to know how to effectively confront someone that has hurt us and feel confident in asserting ourselves without feeling like we have to either hurt that person or convince that person or argue with them or just give in to them, right? Those are kind of unhealthy ways to go about resolving conflict. But if there's a powerful set of skills that teach us how to more effectively deal with conflict, and they're skills that most of us are not taught to value enough, and we're not going to learn them in our homes or even at school. And we probably won't see it modeled for us in most everyday situations. So it's something that we have to intentionally and deliberately seek out for ourselves. And we have to actually practice these things. There's an art to expressing ourselves and learning to compromise with other people and taking another person's perspective and helping them to see our perspective without just beating them over the head with it, right? And coming up with reasonable solutions that actually meet our needs and meet the other person's needs as well. So it's a very delicate dance. And again, it's something that is worth seeking like formal professional training in, I think, as just a prerequisite to being a parent or a member of a family, right? So I think that this is important because if you have those skills, then you don't feel like you have to just run away anytime there's a conflict or something that triggers you within your family, and you don't have to do this thing where you just shut people out because they piss you off. Because the truth is that you can actually come out of conflict situations with a stronger family if you know how to manage conflict correctly. And honestly, in my experience, not handling conflict and just either running away from it or shutting it down only causes it to pop up again in other relationships, in other situations. And it might even mean that you end up seeing it again in your relationship with your children, because there might be certain personality traits or ways of communication that are genetic. So, you cut off your dad or your aunt or whatever because they irked you. And next thing you know, your child sounds just like them or is doing things that remind you of them. And now you have to decide, are you going to learn how to deal with this properly? Or are you going to cut off your own kid too, just because you don't know how to deal with the feelings that they bring up in you, in the way that they act or the way that they are going about things? And we can't just, stomp those traits out of them. They are sometimes, part of the way that they are wired, the way that they're built. Again, we're dealing with families. So we're dealing with genetics, we're dealing with heritable traits, things that are sometimes in the DNA. And so we see certain patterns pop up again and again, generation after generation. And we have to learn how to live with those instead of just running away from them. So also think about the culture that you want to create within both the family that you have helped to build and the family that you come from. So do we want to punish the people that have wronged us by cutting them off completely? Or is there any space for honest and authentic conversation about the impact that they have had on us, maybe both good and bad, and any ways that they might be able to make amends with us, to correct their behavior or change the way that they address us or deal with certain situations so that we can stay connected? What I'm getting at is that maybe we need a more restorative model for how we deal with conflict within our families so that we are creating opportunities to heal those broken relationships rather than just having to feel like we need to sever them completely. Of course, it is important to learn how to set reasonable boundaries to protect our own sense of safety and our own mental health and to not take on other people's dysfunction. There will be situations where someone is abusive or someone is just narcissistic and completely unable to empathize with us or put themselves in our shoes and understand where we're coming from. And they're not really interested in having a strong relationship with us. So we would be banging our head against the wall to keep trying to keep that connection in place. It will require us to give way more than our fair share within that relationship. And relationships, even family relationships, need to be give and take between adults, right? So we can't put ourselves in a position to be abused or to continuously be trying to make it work if there's someone that we're connected to that is just blatantly out of pocket, right? So if someone's not cognitively capable of really meeting us halfway, then it really might be necessary to set a really firm boundary with them. It doesn't necessarily mean shutting them out completely, but we need them to understand the impact that their behavior is having. And if they can't, then maybe we need to be able to, create some space there and love them from a distance, as we like to say. But certainly raising kids is one of those experiences that makes you realize just how much you need people. You will literally break yourself, health wise, money wise, and psychologically if you are trying to undertake such a big and important role as, that of a parent without some kind of help. And our families, whether we like it or not, our families, whether that be parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, whatever, these are meant to be built-in support systems for us as we raise the next generation of our family's bloodline, right? This is nature's design. This is the creator's design, in that you have these people that are supposed to be as invested in your children's well-being as you are. These are the only people that can really give our kids a true sense of who they come from genetically and give them a sense of our family's history and all the ways that our family over the course of generations has persevered and come through all the ups and downs of just life intact. Like any families, our families are imperfect, they're broken. So there are ways in which there's going to be, tough stories to tell. There are going to be tragedies that we need to let our kids know about. And they might even see some of these tragedies firsthand if there are situations in the family that are less than ideal, or there are people, of course, there are people who, we just aren't sure are the best people to model for our kids how we want them to be in the world. And that's okay. We can have those conversations with them. We can, protect them in the sense of letting them know, like, this is not a person that you're going to be alone with. This person has some tendencies that I don't feel comfortable with. So while they are a member of our family and we love them, we're not going to spend a ton of time with them. And as they get older, we can explain to them why. So I'm not saying that you have to turn your kids over to any and everyone that might be within the family, but we do need to recognize that even though our families are not perfect, they are too important to just be thrown away. And so as Black people, we cannot afford to throw our own families away. They are the foundational institution for all of us. Cut people off if you absolutely have to, but do everything that you can to be the person in your family that actually helps to heal the intergenerational wounds, and not just the person who severs all ties and tries to start over from scratch without roots. It might seem okay to do that initially, but as your kids get older, I think both you and they will need the support that those roots, those family roots, really are intended to provide. And if you have to do it, if you have to, shut people out, make sure that you are replacing those roles in your children's lives with other people that you trust and who share your values and will be good influences for your children and good supports for you. Don't just leave those gaps there. Don't think that you can just do it on your own or without any support. The reality is that children really do need elders. And by elders, I mean old people, right? They actually do need people that have far more life experience than their parents to provide some historical perspective and just a bigger picture of how life works and what they've seen. Even if you don't agree with everything that comes out of their mouths, there is value to that kind of intergenerational connection for children. And that's been documented in the psychological literature and the child development literature. So we need to recognize that we can't just cut grandparents off and think that our kids won't miss that. They might not know as they get older that that's what they're missing, but there will be a hole there, a void that will need to be filled. And it shouldn't be filled by pop culture. It shouldn't be filled by their favorite celebrities. It needs to be filled by someone in their family or community who is willing to step up and play that role of grandparent or elder. And that person, again, is meant to provide perspective. And they also need other adults beside you or your partner and their other parent. They need someone who can be trusted when maybe you're not available, or when you're tired, or when you are otherwise, occupied. Maybe they have a conflict with you. They need to be able to go to someone else, an adult that both of you are close to, and talk to that person and feel like they can trust the advice and guidance that they get from that person, and that you also feel like that person is going to be reinforcing the lessons and the values that you have for your kids. They're not going to undermine you and what you're trying to teach your kids, but they will be another voice of reason that your children can turn to. So this is often the role of aunts and uncles, or neighbors that you have a close relationship with. And children also benefit from having younger kids around, even if that's not siblings. Maybe that's cousins, maybe that's just kids in the neighborhood, but that gives them a sense of, being part of something bigger than themselves. And that's really what it's all about, is helping them to understand that they're part of a network, they're part of a web of human beings that both care about them and that they have the ability to contribute to. And so having younger kids around really helps, because then the kids can see themselves as the big ones who are able to help and to provide assistance to someone that's smaller than them. They're not always the ones being told what to do. Sometimes they get to be the ones that help another little one figure the world out, right? They get to share some of what they know and feel important. So I think that, keeping our kids in this kind of web of people is important. It's got to be something outside of just our four walls, our little household unit, that they feel connected to. And that is part of their root system. Those roots that keep them grounded need to be spread deep and wide to help keep them stable as they go through life, and to keep us feeling supported as well. Just think about, a tree, right? Since we keep talking about roots, let's think about that analogy. The taller a tree gets, so the older your kids get, the taller it gets, the harder the winds blow. The only thing keeping that tree from toppling over is the strength and depth of its roots. Those roots have to be as deep and as strong and as spread as far wide as that tree is tall. So the taller the tree, the more extensive, the deeper those roots need to be in order to keep it steady, right? So let's treat the roots of our tree. If we notice that, there are aspects of our family that feel like maybe they're sick, maybe they are dysfunctional or toxic in some way, let's get in the habit of treating those aspects of our family, of bringing them, the medicine of ancestral wisdom and of compassion and of communication and conflict resolution skills, so that we can restore those roots, rather than just cutting the tree down and giving up on it because it seems like it's weak. We don't want to cut the tree down and then try to plant it somewhere else without any roots. It's not going to be sustainable that way. It's just going to fall over. So when we try to do this with our kids, when we think that we can just take our kids and raise them on our own, without the support of, an extensive network or community or family, then we're essentially trying to raise trees without any roots. And it's going to be very, very easy to knock them over when those winds start to blow, especially the winds of adolescence, peer pressure, pop culture, and all of these things out there that are just waiting to knock over our little trees. So for the sake of our babies, please don't try to parent in isolation. If you feel like you have to cut everyone off, then maybe there's some work that you need to do in terms of building your own skills around how you express and how you deal with conflict. And there might also be work in terms of building community so that you have people around you that you do trust and that you do feel will be supportive in you raising your children. But let's remember that our families are really the bedrock of our communities. And so the more work that we can do to strengthen and heal them, the better off we will all be. So I guess that's all I've got for today. I hope that this resonates with you. I'd be curious whether you've had this experience of canceling kin and if that has worked out for you, or if you see the negative effects of it in your life or in your children's lives, if it has shown up in different ways. Let's talk about it. You can join us over at BlackPeopleThrive.com at the Black Parent Village and join the conversation. Until then, be well, fam, and be one. Love y'all.